Great to be back in Tampa. Looking forward to today's roundtable. First, I'll just say, we're sorry to hear about the Tampa police officer that was shot earlier today, but he is stable and recovering and is expected to make a full recovery. The suspect, the criminal, the shooter, is dead, and so not going to bother anybody anymore going forward. And we understand, how important it is for people to wear the uniform. I mean, we don't know what all went into it, but the reality is that these guys do a lot for us, so we should be appreciative. The other thing I'll mention just before we get into today's subject matter, Florida's Insurance Commissioner announced that if you take the top 5 auto insurance companies, I think they comprise 78% of all policies in the state. They've announced, decreases in insurance by 6.5% on average, and some as much as 11.5% on average. And so, I've been, sometimes it's like anecdotal, you just talk to people, but I think what people have been saying is like, they started shopping around and they were able to find things that were more affordable. And so, I appreciate them putting that announcement out. And that really is just, even though auto insurance is still spiking nationwide, the reason why you're seeing it opposite in Florida is because we did the litigation reform that was really, the litigation costs were driving up the premiums because, people are paying a lot of money, to lawyers. And that's not, I think, what most Floridians want. So we're able to do those reforms, and it takes some time for that to filter in. And so, now I think you're seeing the benefits of that, but you would not have seen that for sure had that not been done. And, there's people in the legislature that want to reverse those reforms, even though obviously you have a track record now where this has been successful. So we were happy to see that. Now, on education, which is our subject matter today, I'm here joined by our new Commissioner of Education, Stasi Kamoutzis, our new Florida Chief Financial Officer, Blaise Angolia, our President of New College of Florida, Richard Corcoran, and our 2025 Florida Teacher of the Year, Jamie Suarez of Challenger K-8 School of Science and Mathematics. And so I want to thank all of them for being here today. We've got a couple good announcements, but I don't think anyone can say that Florida has not had huge focus on education, certainly since I've been governor. We're proud to be ranked #1 in education freedom, #1 for parent involvement in education, #1 for public higher education, and then we have been, we're in the top on overall education, have been #1, 2, 3 on that, depending on the publication. We've really stood up for the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. We've empowered parents to make sure that they know that the curriculum is sound and in accordance with state standards. We want our kids to learn to add and subtract and learn how to read and write and all the basic stuff. We don't need teachers telling our kids that they were born in the wrong gender or wrong body or doing things like we've seen, unfortunately, take hold in schools across the country. We also don't want our schools to be cadres of ideological indoctrination, and we've led the nation in giving parents and students protections against that. We've also led the nation in school choice. So we have universal school choice in Florida, regardless of your income. Parents have an opportunity to make a meaningful choice about where their kids go to school. And it's not just private scholarships, which obviously that program does. We're #1 for supporting homeschooling in Florida. We also have the most robust charter school program in the entire country, and we just did legislation through the budget that is going to expand and modernize our Schools of Hope program. So you're going to start to see real significant investment in areas that are more blighted and have had really trouble standing up good schools. So that's, I think, a really success story. And of course, no state does better for children with unique abilities than the state of Florida. Those are huge benefits that parents get, and I know it's been a lifeline for so many. So as of now, we have about 1.4 million students that are utilizing some form of school choice options. And what's happened over the years, when I was growing up across the bay, you're in wherever you are, that's just where you went pretty much. Then they kind of started doing like, okay, you have an IB program, maybe you can have a, now parents can choose within a lot of school districts, have a lot of choices amongst those schools as well. So that is really putting parents and families in the driver's seat. We really like that. We're, as I said, very supportive of homeschooling. The number of students getting homeschooling has increased by almost 60% during my administration. And we're not telling you have to do it, but I think a lot of parents, I mean, you know, you work hard to have values and certain things you want to instill in your kids, and going to traditional schools, you are turning them over for 8 hours a day, you know, to a different thing. And sometimes that can be great if you're in a great school or whatever, but I know there's some parents that are just like, you know what, I'm going to take the reins of this. We only get one shot at this. We're going to do it. And that's a choice that we absolutely respect and support when they make that decision. So I don't think there's a single state in the country that's better for homeschooling than the state of Florida. Our school grades have had significant increase. We recently announced that 71% of all of our graded schools are now either A or B schools, which exceeds our performance last year significantly, where we had 64% earn A or B rankings. And so part of the reason I think we've been able to do this is we tried to look at, you know, what was Florida doing well, what it needed to do better. And one of the things that we did well over the years, going back probably, I think, 20 years, was you can't just say, go to school, whatever, everything's great. Like, you need to know, like, are kids actually learning things? Are the standards being met? Does graduating from high school mean something? So Florida made sure that there was accountability, so that school districts would be held accountable, individual schools would be held accountable. Now, how you do that measurement and that accountability, yeah, there's room for debate on that. So we had a situation where that accountability and the measurement was done on one high stakes end of the year exam. And it was interesting because, you know, Richard was our education commissioner my first term as governor, and he would tell me, like, oh, you know, last few weeks is all just about preparing for the exam. And I'm like, well, like, I remember being a student, when you cram for an exam and then you take it, then you forget it really right after that. That's just kind of how it works. So and then if you don't do well on the exam, you're on summer vacation. So how is anyone going to be able to do remediation? So Richard really helped lead on the innovation of why, instead of doing one end of year test, why don't we do progress monitoring, where you have periodic assessments throughout the school year, not as high stakes, but important, and then you can have remediation if the student isn't doing well. The parent can be informed, the teacher can do things. And so that has been something where we've seen it work really significantly. And I think, and both Stassi and Richard can chime in if they disagree, but I think the view of parents and teachers is overwhelmingly that this is a superior method than what was being done before. And I think we do have the data to support that. Now, part of what we wanted to do, and this is an initiative we started when Richard was Commissioner of Education, is we understand the importance of having high standards, we understand the importance of having good curriculum, we understand the importance of having parents' rights respected, but it really does make a difference if you have a good teacher in the classroom. I mean, that can inspire a student to want to learn more, to get interested in certain subjects. And while no one's going to ever get rich being a teacher, the reality is you know, we want to do to make it more attractive than it has been in the past in the state of Florida. So we launched an initiative that would send some of our education money to the school districts that we send, but say it has to be used to increase teacher salaries. Because normally they'd send money, we send money down, billions and billions a year, school districts kind of use it. And so to say, oh, increase education funding because you need more pay for teachers. Well, you can do that at the state level, and without our program, it doesn't guarantee there's going to be any increase in teacher salaries. So our teacher categorical, we've now done billions of dollars that is sent to school districts with strings attached, quite frankly, saying, here's money, you can only use it for teacher pay. And so you've seen teacher pay be able to be increased. And that's just what the state's doing. These local districts, they can add on top of that. They're not limited to that. So we signed a budget in Florida. It was the highest per pupil spending that we've ever had, but I asked in my budget recommendations for an increase in our teacher pay program, and so we wanted an increase so that the total program got up to $1.5 billion. When we rolled it out with Richard, was it 500 million when we started, 600 million? So we wanted to get up to 1.5 billion. Now the Florida Senate was supportive of that position. Florida House was not. So there was a compromise, and it ended up being about 1.35 billion. So that's over $100 million additional to what we've been doing for teacher pay. And I think that that's something that's really significant. We're going to say something more about that in a second. One thing before I do our main announcement is just highlight our commitment to civics education. I don't care what line of work you're going to go into. I don't care what you want to do for higher ed or not higher ed or vocational or anything. Everybody who leaves our K-12 system will be called upon to exercise the duties of being and responsibilities of being a citizen of this republic. And that should mean something. There's a lot of people that have given a lot so that we would have the opportunity to be living in a free country and fighting for those values. So I think it's important that people aren't just blank slates when they get out of here, that they actually understand what went into the foundations of America, what are those enduring principles that our country has stood for, and also how that can inform their view of the 250th anniversary, which is coming up next summer, and we've been doing a lot to build up to that. So I think we are in the business of not just trying to prepare students for certain higher education opportunities, certain vocations, which, obviously that's part of it, but I do think we're in the business of ensuring that we're producing good citizens and people that are going to take those responsibilities seriously. It's my view that when you learn about what went into the founding of America, when you learn about the ideas that were discussed and that are reflected in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, invariably students are going to be glad that they're here in the United States of America, because it's just like it says, there's nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. Founders knew what they were doing. 1787, 1788, those debates. Till now, there's been a lot of technological change. There's been a lot of things that have happened, but really human nature has not changed. The relationship between individuals and the government, the source of rights, hasn't changed. And so they studied the whole backdrop of human history. They studied every republic. They studied the monarchies. They studied all this, and they put a stake in the ground about, hey, here are the core principles. Our rights don't come from government. They're endowed by our Creator. You create government to protect the rights you already possess. You understand government has a tendency to run amok, so you have to build checks and balances within those systems of separated powers. And there's really nothing, there's not many insights that they missed, because ultimately they were talking about, how can people live in a free society and pursue their dreams and make the most of their God-given talents. And those underlying principles really don't change. They're as relevant today as they were then. The trappings change. The policy issues on the surface certainly change. Everything around us, how we do things, how we communicate, that all changes. But the underlying principles remain the same. So we've done a lot on civics. We've done our program for teachers to go through the civics training course. They get a $3,000 bonus. We've done millions and millions of dollars in bonuses for our teachers. We have probably now the best speech and debate, civics and debate initiative in the country, have these massive competitions. And I always say, the value of speech, yes, we want kids to be able to get up there, express a viewpoint, and maybe even have a dialogue. We can't raise kids to just spend all day on the phone, texting or being on social media. Lord knows, subcontracting out thought to AI. I mean, it's really dangerous, I think, some of the stuff that some folks want to see for our society. So there's value in being able to do that generally. There's also value when you're in a debate program to say the debate is going to be on, Second Amendment. And maybe you're somebody that hasn't been terribly supportive. You may be called upon to argue in favor of those rights. So you're gonna have to get out of your comfort zone and maybe think, okay, why do other people think differently than me? What assumptions do I have? What this? And I think it creates people that really are, have better open minds. A lot of higher education in recent years, particularly in places like Columbia and Harvard, it's all just about imposing orthodoxy. So these students really never have their assumptions questioned. Well, speech and debate, you know, your assumptions get questioned, and you got to think deep. You got to defend your positions. You got to use logic. You got to reason. So I'm a big believer in it. I think it's taken off. I mean, it's done far better than I think we initially thought. We were just hoping we'd get a handful of people that'd be interested in it, and now it's been something that's really, really good. So all that is great, and we're happy to be able to trumpet that. Now, one of the issues you've seen percolating around in probably the last couple years, and this was an issue nationwide, was teacher vacancies, particularly in public schools. And there was a lot of attention on Florida just because that's what corporate media does. And so I would talk to my guys, I'd be like, well, where are we on this? And we were below the national average even then when they were trying to make an issue of it. But there was an issue nationwide. So we went ahead and we did a series of initiatives to be able to channel some good people into positions that were needed in our school system. And I'm pleased to announce that as a result of those efforts and as a result of Florida's emphasis on education, we've now reduced teacher vacancies for the 2025-2026 school year by another 17.7%. And so we're now, yeah, it's good. So just in the last 2 years, if you look at all the vacancies 2 years ago, we've now filled 30% of those. We are attracting teachers. We've dedicated more than $5.9 billion towards teachers and pay increases, as I mentioned earlier. We've expanded the number of pathways for qualified individuals. We have our teacher apprenticeship program. Right now, more than 80 individuals are receiving on-the-job training from veteran teachers while they pursue their teaching certification, and nearly 500 more have applied for the program. More than 100 military veterans have begun their teaching career through a temporary teaching certificate through our military veterans certification pathway, and nearly 700 more have applied for the program. So we're here now to say that's a job well done. And what, the rate is now 1% or?
Just under that.
Just under 1%, which is far below probably the national average at this point. Now they won't do, you know, they'll, like California could be this or New York or whatever, and then, you know, it's just interesting who decides to try to make issues of Florida stuff. But that's just the way it goes. We understand that. So that's where we are there. Now I'm going to get our panelists to be talking about that and some other issues. But the one thing I will say on teacher pay, budget was signed at the end of June. Budget went into effect on July 1st. The money's there. What we've seen, unfortunately, in some school districts, not all, and not even most, but some, I think we had 16, that delays giving the salary increases to the teachers. And some of that was because of school unions. And what they would do is they knew they had this money that had to go to teacher salaries, so they would withhold that as a bargaining chip to be able to extract other things for their agenda that have nothing to do with increasing teacher salaries. So we got in a situation where, like last year, you had 6, 7, 8 months went by where some of these unions were holding up the pay increases for the teachers. That is not right. And so we don't want that to happen this year. It's important to get these pay increases out the door now, especially leading into holidays. People need to have the resources. It's an important time of year to be able to do that. So we, and Commissioner Koumoutsas is going to be all over this. We're going to be monitoring who is stepping up to get the money in teachers' pocket and who is dragging their feet. But and some of these folks are going to say a little bit more about these unions. But, you know, they just had a big conference with the main teachers union nationally. I think it's American Federation of Teachers or one of them. And the stuff that they're doing these resolutions to adopt positions on whatever the trendy left-wing policy is that it has nothing to do with educating the kids. and they become such blatant partisan operations that when they're withholding pay increases and using that, it's because they're trying to pursue this other agenda. And that's wrong. The schools are not the place for your agenda. The schools are the place to put the kids first and the parents first and to get that money in the pocket of the teachers, which is what it's intended to do. So we hope to see all of these pay increases processed in teachers' pockets as soon as possible. We're not going to just sit idly by and let this drag out for months and months on end where the teachers aren't getting what they need. So, these teacher unions, remember, when COVID happened, I said we have to have the kids in school. Now that was considered very controversial at the time. In fact, I don't know that there was anyone else saying that anywhere, any other governor, but it wasn't controversial if you actually looked at the data. If you got rid of the hysteria, if you ignored the media narratives, if you ignored the hysteria, if you ignored all that, and if you just focused on the data, it was obvious way back in the spring or summer 2020 when we were doing this that we needed to have kids in school. And it was interesting, most of the teachers wanted to be back because they took pride in their role in these kids' lives. And it's like, okay, if kids can just sit on the couch and watch Zoom, then why do we have all these schools and stuff? Of course it's not as good. Of course you're not going to be able to do that. So we really said that. I remember Richard and we rolled that out, and oh my gosh, you would have thought that we were. It was. But the union opposed us. They sued us to try to lock kids out of school. If they had their way, they would have left the kids out of school indefinitely. And in some of the places where they run the show, they were locked out a long time in some of these places. And so, they would do these stunts like Richard's office. Richard, he had the biggest building. Stasi has it now in Tallahassee, the Department of Education building. First of all, you guys don't need that building that size, and they know that, and that's why we're doging state agencies in addition to local governments. And that was built long before I was there. But they would do these stunts where they would bring hearses and coffins and put them in front of the Department of Education because they were trying to tell people, if you open school, all your kids are going to die. That's what they were trying to tell parents. And that was not justifiable. There was no data to suggest that. But that was the type of hysteria that was going on. And so, when that happened, I think a lot of people around the country saw these school unions for how partisan they've become. And I kind of knew that before, but I don't know that it was as wide. And then you say, okay, who's fighting against your kid being able to get an education? It was those groups. And then come to find out, they've indulged on all these really, really strident leftist policies as if that should be what education is about. And so when I see them, slow walking pay increases, honestly, it's disappointing, but unfortunately it's not surprising. So we can do better. We need to get that money out. And I'm really, really excited about the ability for the teachers to get that. And we'll come back for more next year when the legislature comes back in. As I said, I asked for more than what was eventually gotten. I think we can do better, and we're going to push to do better. Now, all right, so we're going to start with our Commissioner of Education now, Stasi Kamoutzis. Curriculum. It's really important to have strong curriculum. And I'll tell you, we started doing the reviews of these textbooks, and some of the nonsense they were trying to jam in there, it's just appalling to see what's going on. Now, we have a big enough school system, we're kind of the 800-pound gorilla. If we say no to a textbook, they've got to fix it because the order would just be too big. So these guys, the department under Richard, under Manny Diaz, and under, they've had to go through, and some of this stuff is just blatant that they're putting in there. And it's total activism. So they've had to do that. We've seen across the country ridiculous things being jammed into school libraries, pornographic books, unfortunately, being jammed into school libraries. And I'm just thinking to myself, why is that something that any parent would want? And the reality is no parents want it. So you got to have, one, parents have the wherewithal and the ability to go in and police this and bring it up. But then you also have to have folks in the commissioner's office who are willing to do something about it. So Where are we on the curriculum front, and how are we leading on that?
Thank you, Governor, and it's great to be here in Hillsborough County at the Hillsborough Academy of Math and Science. Thank you so much for hosting us. What a prestigious panel I'm on, but especially to be joined here with Jamie Suarez, our Teacher of the Year, who did a phenomenal job of representing educators this year. I've heard so much feedback throughout the state of the great work that she's been doing, connecting with teachers, and sharing what actually happens in Tallahassee. So appreciate you being here, Jamie. Governor, because of your leadership, Florida has absolutely been a model to the nation when it comes to curriculum, whether it's our robust standards, whether it's the instructional materials that go through a very thorough process, as you just identified. Florida has led the nation in ensuring that we are prioritizing an education over indoctrination. But what you have seen at the teachers union at the national level over the past few years has been very concerning. For example, last year, 4th of July, as we were all celebrating with our families our nation's founding, you had the teachers union that same week hosting a conference. The NEA starts putting out these agenda items. Some of them are supporting these pro-Hamas terrorist agendas. Some of them are supporting open borders. They're supporting, social unrest, labor strikes. The list goes on. It's pure ideology. And then we saw what was unraveled this year around the same time through the American Federation of Teachers and Randy Weingarten, where there were resolutions that went forward. And some of these resolutions, as you look at them, it's very concerning what's being pushed at the national level. The push of pronouns in schools, the push of boys playing in female sports, pushing boys entering female locker rooms or female bathrooms. Even this climate change crisis that was peddled and cited by the teachers union and this new partnership with what I call the Woke Economic Forum, not the World Economic Forum, who's pushing an agenda that now they're going to start creating a national curriculum to be imposed on our students. That's just totally inappropriate, and it's not going to happen here in the state of Florida. I'm proud that not only over the years have we ensured that we've built out the most robust state standards and ensured that our textbooks reflect what is age and developmentally appropriate for our students, but also this year, I know you signed an appropriation for $3 million to create essentially a statewide curriculum for English language arts beginning in grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. And that's a big deal because we know that literacy achievement by 3rd grade definitely impacts the trajectory of a child's life. And so I appreciate your leadership on that, but I know the districts are excited for when the curriculum is developed because it'll be at a much affordable rate for those districts. And so Florida continues to lead. Don't take my word for it. The governor was citing some of the crazy examples that we came across in textbooks. Let's talk about social studies. When we came across an example in kindergarten textbooks that talked about Colin Kaepernick, who was kneeling for the national anthem. Now, do you think that's age and developmentally appropriate for a kindergarten child to be taught our history and focus on the activism that's taking place where most folks would say is extremely disrespectful to this country's founding? And so that's the kind of stuff that we've seen where we've ensured is not taking place in our schools. And so I appreciate your leadership on this issue, and that's why Florida continues to be a model for the nation. So thank you, Governor.
Well, let me just say very clearly, because we've dealt with this in policy areas outside of education, like when we nuked ESG, World Economic Forum is dead on arrival in Florida. There's going to be no World Economic Forum in our curriculum in K through 12, no exceptions. That is unacceptable. Okay, Richard Corcoran. So Richard was Commissioner of Education during our first term, and we launched school choice, more school choice. We did a lot of stuff, but we really had to navigate COVID, and we saw how poorly that was navigated in some other states with kids with really irreparable harm because of not having access to sports and school and activities. And Richard, we leaned in at a time when nobody else really agreed with us. Got a lot of blowback, and I think that Richard became kind of public enemy number one for these partisan left school unions. But I think we won every fight that we entered. So talk about your experience with that, how those entities were fighting against the best interests of kids, and how you've had to navigate that.
First, I'd say he keeps saying we. None of this happens without a strong governor. I mean, I could have been commissioner of education for anybody, and if they're not going to fight and be led to fight and say, go take these hills, I have your back, it doesn't happen. So I appreciate the we, but it's really you, Governor. I do want to start a little bit. The governor says it so well. He's even written a book about it. But, I think we have to go to the root cause. Like, what's the philosophy? What's the purpose of education? And for the history of mankind that the governor talked about, these enduring questions, these enduring histories that have been taught for centuries still exist today and still are relevant today. And the purpose of education during that time when we create Galileos and Newtons, I don't care if it's science, math, English, literature, art, all went to the fact that we, as the governor says, education exists to raise up great citizens and great people. And it is what makes us distinctly human. And when you get away from that and you say, okay, it's about getting a job, that's a byproduct of a great education. If you have a great education, you will always be employed. You will be taught humility. You'll be taught empathy. You'll be taught critical thinking. And those things lead to employment. And we just get away from it. And to the point of the World Economic Forum, it really is, their whole idea of an international curriculum, and you look at it, it's about work, jobs, creating these widget makers so that, and it's all about the workers. If we can, the workers, and we get good workers, and the workers do good things, and they'll be, and all of that sounds really, really familiar. It's called Karl Marx. He wrote a whole book about it, and it's really their World Economic, I think they call it Technology 4.0, or but it's really Marxism 2.0. It's massively failed, and it'll fail again. And it's led by billionaire elites who just want the proletariat recreated for their own benefit. And it's almost evil. It's a strong statement, but it really is. And it's been borne out that way for centuries. And you saw that same thing with the teachers union. What we need is to have students graduate from high school, have a world-class education, be taught what it means to be a great citizen and achieve in the world. And the number one entity for the last 60, 70 years who has done everything they can to stop that, and we're not talking random, opinion. These are factual things that we can go through over and over and over as the teachers union. I always say the greatest threat, it's not, Putin's Russia, it's not China, it's not radical jihadism, it's education in America in massive decline. When you look at our NAEP scores, guess who did well on NAEP scores because they opened up schools? Florida and Governor DeSantis. Every other state pretty much has a declining NAEP scores in the basics of English and math. They measure it by proficiency. 60+% of students in America, the rest of America, 60+% aren't proficient under the NAEP exam. And the people who are getting lost the most are your low-income earners, your people who are already struggling. Those are the students that are getting lost the most. And here's the perfect factual examples of why the teachers union is leading that charge. It's not, to the commissioner's point, all they care about is gender dysphoria or whatever, all these issues, while we're at that 60% threshold. We had a program where we said if you're a low-income student, you're struggling in school, and when the governor got elected, there were schools in Florida that were F. When you dropped your child off as a 5th grader in kindergarten, it was an F school. They went through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, all the way through 12th grade, and the entire time they were in that school, it was an F school. We might as well have just given the parents in kindergarten, here's a money-back guarantee, your child is going to be somewhere functionally illiterate, and is going to struggle the rest of their lives. That's how bad it was. So we created a program that said, okay, if you're in that situation, you can go to a school of your choice, who sued to say poor, low-performing, low-economic students should not have that opportunity, and tried to stop it was the teachers union. I mean, and I said that lawsuit was the height of evil. It's just the worst of the worst. And it's the same thing the governor mentioned with opening schools. Who in all of these studies, and even the head of the teachers union, Randy Weingarten, now she comes out and she says, you know what, we led the charge to open schools. Literally. She literally says that. And I think the governor said at a press conference, well, it's interesting, Randy, that you say that, because in July of 2020, we pretty much remember the lawsuit you filed to shut us down and failed. But literally, this is how they reinvent the wheel. But she literally did that. And who got lost, who's suffering the most, are your low-income struggling students. Those are the ones that are dropping exponentially in the NAEP. And it's all led by a teachers union. They really, really do need to be stopped. And you've led the charge, whether it's the legislation to the anti-union legislation, and just fighting on all those things that really do matter. Curriculum, are we really teaching kids how to be great citizens, and what makes them distinctly human? All of those things have been done in this 7 years, Governor. But with you have an advocate here. The teachers union needs to be stopped, and what they're advocating for is ultimately the destruction of a wonderful country that we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if parents looked at these resolutions that these national unions have been cranking out and just, you know, spent 15 minutes reading even just the top lines. I think a lot of them would be like, whoa. I know some people have kind of gotten on to the really sharply partisan agenda. I mean, they're basically like, you know, this New York City mayor candidate is like, that's his views that are reflected in these national school unions. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's just preposterous that would be the case. Okay, Blaise Ingoglia is the chief financial officer of Florida for what, the last week now. It was a vacancy. I appointed him. He was a senator in Florida, north of here. In Hernando County. He was also state rep, and so he's carried some pretty significant legislation, really across a wide variety of issues, election integrity, against illegal immigration, but also protecting the paychecks of teachers vis-a-vis any type of union dues. And so in Florida, no automatic deduction for dues for school unions. And so if you want to do it, you can do it. It is in Florida's constitution that you can do these. I mean, there's a lot of people that said that you know, some of these public sector don't make as much sense, but the reality is that was reflected there many decades ago. So you do, but you can do voluntarily, write a check, do what you want to do on your own, but no automatic deductions. And the reason why is because what they would do is they'd say, hey, you got to sign this authorization. There's a lot of pressure to sign the authorization for the automatic deduction. And so what we found is, and since that reform has been, you know, the number of teachers that have opted to do that have plummeted. And I think for good reason. I mean, these are groups that are literally some of them holding back the pay increases to try to leverage for other parts of their agenda. They've got national unions that are basically just going woke ideology across the board and trying to inject that into schools. So you could see why a teacher who didn't get into it for that and just wants to do well for kids maybe would rather have that money in the pocket, especially when we've been delivering pay increases year after year since I've been governor. And so that's really increased freedom for them to be able to make those decisions. And so, Blaise, you want to talk about that and anything else regarding this subject? Floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. I do want to echo the other comments that we would not be here in this state, and particularly on the big issues of the day when it comes to education, without the leadership of Ron DeSantis. He has a very good compass and always trying to do what is right. And then, you know, offers solutions to make sure that we as a community, as a state, continue to lead on these issues. So thank you for that. I would be remiss if I did not announce something. I've been the CFO for a little bit over a week. I'm also serving as a state fire marshal. We had a death in Lucie County last week. And just last night, Governor, I found out late last night that there was another firefighter death in Dixie County. So I think I can speak on behalf of all of us that our hearts and prayers go out to those families, and we are with you. They are hometown heroes, along with our police and our fire. So we treasure the people who put their lives on the line every day. But there's also another form of hometown hero that I respect very, very much, and that is the teacher in the classroom trying to do what they are trying to do to make sure that they are protecting our future generations. And so much that every year, and if you go on Facebook or Instagram, I literally hand sign tens of thousands of letters in my district thanking the teachers for what they do. And I hand sign them all. There's no auto pen, Biden auto pen. I do it myself because I want to show people that I actually care about what they do. And the caring is what brought us to the piece of legislation that I put forward with the help of Governor's leadership. So even though I have always been sort of like a financial tax and spend, while protecting taxpayer, looking at the P&Ls and balance sheets and trying to make government more lean and accountable, I've always, as a state senator, state representative, I listened to everyone, and I started getting a bunch of emails from principals and teachers, boots on the ground in the classroom, started telling me about some of the things that they were being asked to teach by the teachers' unions inside their classrooms, and they were conflicted. This was against what they were always taught that they should be doing in the classrooms, and against what they just truly believed, and they were being forced upon. And I will tell you, some of the stuff that was given to me in forms of email with direct links to some of the union websites where they had, pages and pages of resources of things that they should be teaching. And I see there must be a lot of teachers. I see a lot of yeses going on in here, seeing this stuff also. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, how did we get to this point? And then we started investigating, along with the governor's leadership, just how the unions operate, what they do in the classroom, and how that seeps into our minds of our most vulnerable in society, our children that are in the classroom, because they are very impressionable. And some of the things I started learning from them in conversations was, I can't remember the last time I saw my union rep. And I was like, wait a minute, you don't even talk to you. Well, no, it's automatically deducted out of our paycheck. They don't feel a need to come around and prove their self-worth anymore. It's sort of automatic. And I said, well, that just seems problematic to me. I mean, if I had a union rep, I would want to, I know in the old days, my father used to have this conversation with me. They used to drop by the shop, and they used to hand them a check, and this was the union dues, and it was a forced conversation to talk about things that were going on. That doesn't exist anymore. Then I started looking at some of the data and started realizing that the way they choose union membership, and these are the union leadership, that unfortunately pushes some of this stuff on the teachers and sort of bullies them into doing this stuff in the classroom. The way they chose this, it was like they had such a low bar. It was like they had to have 50% cooperation, and then they would only get 40%, and then 50% of the 40%, which is 20%, would choose union leadership, and then they would go and collective bargain on their behalf. So I just found that super disproportionate and problematic, where you had this small subset of the teachers' unions who were electing, in my opinion, a lot of leftists that were then going negotiating on their behalf, telling teachers that they weren't getting the money in the classroom that they were supposed to be getting, which is absolutely false, because under this governor there has been this historic investment in education in the state of Florida. In fact, it became a game. I would hear stories all the time how teachers were being told that they have no money for raises, when there was a pot of money sitting there just waiting to be divvied out in terms of collective bargaining and unions and the districts. And then they tell the teachers to go to the students in the classroom and tell their parents that they have to do fund drives and raise money because they had no money, which is just absolutely not true. I will tell you right now, there's more than enough money to keep on giving teachers raises and cut the administrative costs. But we reformed all that to say, no, from now on, you are not allowed to automatically deduct it. The government is not going to do that for you. You are going to have a forced conversation with teachers, union members, and start talking to them about the things that are important. It's a way to hold the union leadership accountable. Another thing is we raised the threshold where you had to have at least 60% mandatory participation, and then at least half of that participation in order to choose the union members. Because it is important that if you are going to represent, like I said before, our hometown heroes, that they should be representing not just one ideology. You're there to bargain and present on behalf of all the teachers. So with that, I appreciate your leadership on this issue. We continue to make strides in education. We will not stop, and just know that we value the hometown heroes inside our classroom.
Great. Well, thanks, Blaise, and appreciate how you've hit the ground running as CFO. So Jamie Suarez, 2025 Teacher of the Year. We just actually named the one for 2026, and so they had the education conference. All the counties or all the districts were able to put in their nominee, and all of them got $10,000 bonus. And then the semifinalists got 20.
That's right.
And then then the teacher of the year got 50.
That's right.
What was it when you started? It was
I
like,
think 10, maybe 10.
yeah. So, I mean, but Richard helped do that, and so the teacher of the year was able to get a $50,000 bonus, but then all the nominees, and it's more than 67 because they do the virtual in the other districts, so they all got $10,000. So pretty significant support there, just to say thank you. And so, Jamie, can you talk about your experience? I mean, you're a math teacher. But also just the idea of, because sometimes people say Florida doesn't give money for teacher pay or teacher increases, even though you can look at every budget for how many years and see differently.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Jamie Suarez, and I teach middle school math at Challenger K-8 in Hernando County. And I can tell you I am very blessed to work in a state where teacher salaries are prioritized. To go back to 2020, when Governor DeSantis first raised teacher salaries, we were raising the starting teacher salary, which was great. The idea was to bring in teachers and attract teachers into the profession. Obviously, that has worked. However, at that time, I was a veteran teacher. So what those raises meant for me was that I wasn't going to see a raise that year. And I just remember talking to my family and just saying that, not only am I not seeing a raise this year, but this also means that I won't see another raise for about 4 or 5 more years. I've been teaching for 18 years, and typically raises, when we get them, we get a bump in pay that's about to the tune of $500. And then about every 4 or 5 years later, we'll see a significant increase in our salary. Well, I can tell you I've never been more happy to be wrong about something because our governor for the next few years continued to raise teacher pay. My own salary has gone up over the last 4 years at $10,000. That is huge. That's the largest increase I have had to my salary in the 18 years that I have been teaching. So I'm thankful that we have a governor that prioritizes raising teacher salaries. This past year, I was out of the classroom and I was able to travel and just get into all of the other counties. And several of the counties that I visited, it was in December, so it was about Christmas time. And we were talking about teacher salaries, and a lot of them were echoing that they had still not seen those increases in pay this year, even though we know that we did get that salary bump. And that saddened me because, here it is Christmas time. A lot of these teachers their moms, their dads, they have children. I know I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. I can tell you those Christmas wish lists, they don't get cheaper as the kids get older. My daughter actually created a PowerPoint this year to showcase what she was asking for. So my heart went out to some of these teachers who just had not received that increase in pay here at Christmas time. So I'm thankful for a governor that not only prioritizes the increases in pay, but also getting the money into the hands of teachers as quickly as possible. So thank you, Governor.
Great. Well, thanks for all your hard work. And we did. I mean, we definitely did. I think the first year we did hundreds of millions in Best and Brightest. Mm-hmm. Then we did our teacher categorical. During COVID, we did $1,000 bonuses for all principals and all K-12 teachers and charter, not just the school districts. And then, of course, our teacher pay program has continued to build and build. We obviously wanted to raise the average minimum salary just because it's recruit and retain. And so you got to do both. And getting it to where it was more competitive was something that was important. So I think our goal, we're probably close to 50,000 now, right, for the average minimum across the state. Now every time we say average, I'll have someone say, well, wait a minute, I got less. Yes, because some places may be a little more. Some pieces may, Miami's more expensive to live than some other counties in Florida, and Hillsboro's more expensive than some. So it isn't going to be perfectly equal, but quite frankly, the purchasing power isn't perfectly equal. 50,000 goes a lot farther in some parts of Florida than it does in others. So we wanted to raise it to over 48,000. I think we're getting close to 50,000. But then, so that's been done. And so the money that we've done, so like all this other money, that can be done how the districts want. So definitely rewarding the teachers that have been in the classroom and improved themselves, all this stuff.
all been very important. So I think both of those were needed, recruit and retain. If we only did the average minimum, you'd have people like Jamie that would not have gotten. But if you only did the people that had the more advanced, I don't know that we would have been able to fill these vacancies the way I think that's been helpful to do. So we really believed in doing both, and that's something that's really, really meaningful. So the vacancies are a big chunk have gone down. I think nationally, you would see probably higher in most parts of the country than here in Florida. We've had policies to address recruiting good people. I think it is succeeding. There's more that we're going to do. We are going to come back for the next legislative session next year and seek additional funding for teacher pay. That will be, my budget will come out probably at the end of this calendar year or sometime, but I can tell you that will be in it. So this year was an increase, but we're going to do even more. But until then, I certainly think that the money that's already been put forward for this should be processed and given to the teachers. We don't want to see delays. We don't want to see games. The fact that you'd have Christmas time come for pay increases that were approved July 1st of that year and have the teachers still not see that reflected in their salaries, that's wrong. And it shouldn't happen. So we've got, of all of our school districts, when we come to, certainly they can do it now. Like, it doesn't have to wait just before the holidays, but certainly, over the next month or two, we expect that these salaries will make it into the pockets and the paychecks of the teachers. And I think everyone will be happy if that's the case. Okay, did we have any questions back there?
Governor, you also mentioned that the state is now monitoring this situation when it comes to unions, as you say, slow walk in some of these pay raises. So what can the state do? What kind of penalty and what does monitoring involve?
I'll give Stassi the floor on that.
Absolutely. So you have seen, dating back to 2022, I remember the Key West State Board of Education meeting where we had a lot of districts come in and explain themselves where they were at. It was May when we had that State Board of Education meeting. So think about that. The end of the school year had come, and we were still having to deal with our teachers. So we're going to do what we've always done. We will continue to beat the drum and bring these districts to our State Board of Education meeting, and they will explain to the world what is the holdup. Time after time after time again, every superintendent explains it is the teachers union. And so I sent out a memo to all teachers, all school districts today saying, you need to put pressure on these unions who are holding up your money. This is your money. You have to advocate for that. And as a State Board of Education, we will continue to drag these districts into our State Board meetings if it's past the holidays and this money still hasn't been paid for teachers. So we will not take our foot off the gas pedal. We're going to continue to shame these unions because the world needs to understand what they're doing for teachers. They purport to represent teachers, but in fact, they actually do the opposite.
And I thought, the first time this happened, obviously we had, and I think that year was really good year for pay increases and you'd think because what happens is when we do stuff like this, a lot of times the union will take credit, even though they had nothing to do with it. And in fact, we did it in spite of their activities in many respects. But a lot of times they'll take credit. So I didn't think this would be an issue. And then I'm finding out people aren't getting this money. I'm thinking to myself, why? Wouldn't it be in their interest to say, hey, we delivered pay increases, keep paying us dues? But that's not what they chose to do. They chose to play games with these salary increases because they had a different agenda. But that's why we mention what's going on in these national unions. Take a look at the stuff they're putting out. And their attention, they care more about engaging in the pronoun Olympics in schools than they do about the bread and butter. They care more about stuffing boys and girls back. This is an ideology that is motivating those organizations, certainly at the national level. So I think it's been a problem in some of these areas in Florida. But I'll tell you, I think, Stassi is, Richard was very strong. Manny Diaz was very strong. Let's just put it this way. I don't think you're going to see any a foot let off the gas at all with Stassi in there. So buckle up if you don't want to do what's right for the teachers, because we're engaged on this from the beginning. A couple years ago when we had the delay, this wasn't something we thought would be possible. It didn't make sense why you'd want to delay it. Now we know, and now we're going to use all the tools at our disposal to make sure that this money gets where it belongs.
Governor, have you had any conversations with the legislature leadership, one way or the other, about whether they're going to take on your redistricting push?
No, I haven't.
you know, we have an interesting history with the legislature on redistricting, as some of you may know. We did the current map, which has just been upheld by the Florida Supreme Court, also was upheld in federal court. And Blaze was one that was really strong on this. So I haven't, but and my guys are going through kind of the Supreme Court's opinion, all the different stuff, looking at some of the other areas that there may be problems with in the map. Because if you think about it, you know, you had an egregious racial gerrymander that stressed from Gadsden County, which is west of Tallahassee, all the way to the city of Jacksonville, just kind of like that. And that was drawn to, you know, for a gerrymander reason. And so we obviously thought that was constitutionally defective. But, you know, you look at other parts of the state, South Florida, I mean, you know, there's some potential problems too. So I haven't done it yet. I think that if I will when I need to. But this is obviously something that we're looking at very seriously. I've said that I would look favorably on the legislature taking it up. So I would just say stay tuned on that.
Governor, on that ruling, Supreme Court ruling a couple weeks ago on the 22 map, it looked like federal concerns were superseded state concerns, i.e. Fair Districts Amendment. Should we be concerned that this may be the evisceration of the Fair Districts Amendment, depending on how?
I think there's a lot of people that believe that the Fair Districts Amendment is unconstitutional, because what it does is it mandates having race predominate, whereas neutrality really should be the constitutional standard. And I know there's history, I know there's different, but if you look at the U.S. Supreme Court's jurisprudence, I mean, they've obviously moved in a different direction. I think that they're going to see some more of those cases. And so the question is, you know, that was written in a way to basically get buy-in across a political coalition. And so the way it was done, many people believe runs afoul of the federal Constitution. If that's the case, then I think the Florida Supreme Court's position would likely be, well, this is just it's unenforceable at this point because it's constitutionally defective from a federal perspective. I happen to share that view, and I remember when it passed. I wasn't governor, and I remember, and it wasn't something I was for then, but then when I became governor, we started doing this. When I started looking at kind of how they set up this scheme, and then the map that the legislature produced, you know, a lot of people voted for that because they were told that that was the way to get rid of a Corrine Brown district. I mean, that was a huge part of the messaging. And a lot of Republicans voted for it because they didn't want, because she had a district that snaked south. So then they just did a district that snaked west. I mean, it was really 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It wasn't good for her because she lost some of her base. But that was kind of the issue with it. But yeah, there's a lot of problems there. Now, I don't think the Florida Supreme Court was forced to necessarily go that far in this ruling, because it was obviously a very solid and compact map and sensible map that followed all the rules. But I do think that if pressed, I think there'd be a lot of support to say, yeah, you know, this thing just wasn't, it's not going to pass muster federally. So that could potentially happen over the next few years.
Governor, for county officials and city officials who don't sign the update to the 287B agreements, this is happening over in Orange County, will you remove them from office?
We've made it very clear. This is not a policy debate at this point. The policy debate was at the beginning of the year when I called the special session. Our law in Florida is that you have to do your best maximum efforts to assist with immigration enforcement. And Florida's led the way on that. We've led on arresting of illegal aliens. Obviously, you're now seeing the flights for DHS, that cadence is starting to increase. I think you're going to see that go up dramatically. And that's the policy of Florida. So you don't have the ability to just say you're not going to be on the team on this. Now, the Attorney General, I know, has engaged in them, and he's creating a record. And so what I do is, if it comes time, I look at the record, I look at my constitutional authority, and if there's a conflict between how elected officials are acting and the duties that they have to not just faithfully uphold the law, but a whole host of other duties that are in the Florida Constitution that would give the governor the power to suspend if they breach the duties. You know, we go through that analysis and then make decisions. But I think that I've shown that I'm willing to do that. I mean, remember, we had a state attorney here in Hillsborough County that took positions that some of these laws were more recommendations than binding, and that went afoul of what a prosecutor's discretion would entail. We did the suspension. We put in Judge Susie Lopez. Obviously, there's not that many people that wish we could go back at this point, and Hillsborough voters, even though he tried to run again, you know, she won a resounding victory. And so I think that we've shown ability. My first week in office, we removed the sheriff of Broward County for the failures involving the response to the Parkland shooting in February of 2014. Now, I wasn't, or 2018. I wasn't governor then, but it was a huge, huge wound for this state and that community. And I got to know a lot of the parents over that year as I was running for governor, and all they wanted was some accountability. No one had been held accountable at all by the time I took office. And so we did that. Florida Senate permanently relieved him of his duties and upheld that suspension. And then when we did the grand jury investigation, we removed a number of the school board members down there for a whole host of different reasons as well. So we have a track record of doing what needs to be done to ensure compliance. But what I would say is that the law is very clear. I had to fight the legislature on this. Blaze was with me on this. There was a handful of the others that were with me on it, but most, like led by the speaker, they did not want to require participation with state and local. That was in their initial bill, and they actually took away all the governor's authority and would have mothballed our existing operations. Horrible, horrible piece of legislation. So we had to fight very hard to be able to get to the point where we got, where these duties are imposed in law. And I can tell you, if you don't do it, even though Florida bans sanctuary cities, if you don't have an affirmative duty, what I think some of those areas, the Gainesvilles and the Orlandos and some of these little pockets around the state, they end up devolving into de facto sanctuary. Like, yeah, they won't run afoul of our sanctuary laws. They'll know kind of how to do that. So it's not going to be flagrant like LA or flagrant like Chicago or some of these places. But they won't be doing what is necessary so that the policy is effective. So they're expected to do it. I know the Attorney General has sent a missive, and I will be watching how that unfolds very carefully. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, you recently said Florida got a raw deal in the census count, but the state under your leadership didn't invest in U.S. Census outreach. How do you reconcile that?
But that's not the issue. The Biden administration's own figures a couple years later showed Florida had the second, that the census was off by us. They overcounted in these blue states. It was almost a complete difference between red and blue. And first of all, I think a lot of that money would have been wasted, quite frankly. And some of that, the blue states are doing that to count illegal aliens. I don't believe illegal aliens should be counted in the census. I think it's wrong. I think it's unconstitutional that they're counted in the census. So there was no way that I was going to devote taxpayer money for that. Even without counting that, we should have gotten at least one more seat. I mean, just think about it. Over that period, now granted, Florida's population really took off from the day the census ended, closed, I think, April of 2020, which was like the start of COVID. We boomed from there like never before. But still, over that decade, we did gain population. Are you trying to tell me Oregon and Florida were equal in population gain over that period of time? No, of course not. People know that. So the Biden people even had to put out analysis a couple years later where they looked at it and they acknowledged that there was flaw here. I was told at the tail end of the Trump administration that we were going to get at least 2 seats. And so we were shocked when it came out. Now the problem is there's not good remedies to be able to, because I wanted to bring a lawsuit. And I was like, what can we do? And they're like, well, you know, I mean, you can maybe have them order a new count, but that's not going to help you in the intervening time. And so I've spoken with the Commerce Secretary under President Trump right now, Secretary Ludnick, about it. They agree that this census was flawed. They agree that Florida did not get the population that it should have gotten. But they also believe, as I do, that this next census, whether they do it mid-decade, which I know they've considered doing another census, because I think you have to do it once every 10 years. It doesn't mean you can't do it more than every 10 years under the Constitution. They should do it and count people that are legally allowed to be here. How many seats would California lose if you only counted lawful people, citizens? They would lose a lot of seats because they're a sanctuary state. For us, we would stand to gain because we did not spend money to try to count illegals, because I don't think that that's constitutionally proper. That is ultimately going to be resolved by the U.S. Supreme Court, because I do think the Trump administration is going to put in for a census that is not going to count foreign nationals, that is just going to count U.S. citizens. And that's really the way, I think that's what the Founding Fathers intended. I mean, they never really contemplated that you'd have a president that would intentionally allow all this people to come in without rule of law, but nevertheless, that's what we had to deal with for the past 4 years. So I think we did get shortchanged. Any way you cut it, we got shortchanged. Even if you put the illegal issue aside, we still got shortchanged with the way they did the calculations. And isn't it interesting? Everyone was forecasting Rhode Island was going to lose a seat, and they didn't. So little Rhode Island has 2 seats, so they didn't lose a seat. Well, come to find out, in Biden's administration, who was the Commerce Secretary? The former governor of Rhode Island. I mean, isn't that interesting that would have happened that way? So I just think that the analysis that even Biden's people had to put out showed without question that we should have a different count for the remaining of the decade. So we've had 2 elections under the current census. There's going to be 3 more elections, congressional elections, 26, 28, and 30, before the next census is done and the next maps are drawn. We could have a new map anyways in Florida, but if we got additional seat awarded to us, then we would be forced to draw. There would be no discretion at all, because we'd go from 28 to 29, maybe even to 30. I had some people in the administration tell me they thought Florida would get like 3 to 5 more seats if they did it properly. Like, I haven't seen that analysis done, but I've had people tell me that. So clearly, and then also we're malapportioned because they stopped the count on April 1st of 2020. The Census Bureau did. I'm not saying that was like anything wrong with that, but that's just when the count stopped. But look what's happened since April of 2020. Look around Hillsborough County to see the growth. So there's some districts in this state where you have way more votes being cast than in other districts in these races. And you wonder, how is it that ends up shaking out the way it does? So I do think that we're malapportioned within the state as well as malapportioned in the country. And the thing about it was, we had a presidential election last year where some people were saying that if Harris just won those Rust Belt states, that would be 270 to 268. If that had happened. So it would have been Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And that would have been a huge crisis for this country, because people like me would have said, well, wait a minute, if you did the census properly, even her winning those 3 states would not have given 270. Trump would have had over 270 with a proper count, even if he didn't win any of those states. And so we really, now obviously he won all of them, it wasn't close, but we would have had a constitutional crisis in this country had it ended up settled into that. So let's get I hope that they redo the census. I think Florida would benefit if they redid the census, but even short of that, I do think that we're going to be looking at the pathways to be able to do the redistricting here in Florida. Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you.